Hi, how you doing? I'm Ella Feingold, orchestrator, Ravel nut, guitar player. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about Ravel's aesthetics and his values as an orchestrator. I touched upon it a little bit in my previous video. And then after that, I'd like to explain how I went about getting a much more um, intimate sense of his orchestration, how I studied the music, and I could make plenty of videos showing all the various techniques that he does, which I'm totally happy to do and will do. But I thought it would be important to show how I learned this stuff so you could apply this stuff if there's somebody you're studying, and I just hope that it might be helpful to you. So this is a book by Stephen Zank called Irony and Sound. It's a great scholarly book. And there's a passage in here from one of Ravel's previous students, Manuel Rosenthal, who was a wonderful composer, orchestrator, and mostly known as a conductor in France. And he studied with Ravel, I think the longest. Ravel didn't have many pupils, maybe 4 or 5. He just didn't really take on students. So I wanted to read a couple of passages. It's a few paragraphs, so, bear with me, but I think it will definitely illuminate a lot of Ravel's values. So this is a passage that Manuel Rosenthal is talking about regarding Ravel's orchestration preferences and how he, quote, taught orchestration. So here we go. Forgive me if I belabor this, but it took Ravel years to make me understand what orchestration consisted of. He never explained anything at all. He simply told me, you instrumentalize very nicely, but you're not orchestrating. The difference? It was nearly by chance that I grasped it from a remark that might well be misinterpreted. One day, Ravel avowed to me, quote, in the end, and don't repeat this, we must try to dupe the listener. He or she must be led astray, made to believe in things to which we alone are privy. If, for example, you wish to assign a certain melodic line to the clarinet, well, anyone can do that well enough. Right, how nicely that works in the clarinet. But if you wish to seduce the listener, then beneath the clarinet you will put something else, something that the listener will not straightaway notice. Only you can know, for instance, the possibilities of pizzicato in the cello. No one will hear them since you have placed them pianissimo underneath the mezzo forte clarinet, but it will be just enough to gently reshape the sound of the clarinet, creating behind it a strange haze, a halo. So that is how one orchestrates. It's what I call fooling the listener. So I think that is just profound. And this type of aesthetic is in so much of Ravel's orchestration, where you maybe hear a muted trumpet. Well, you hear it as an orchestrator, but the listener, might hear it as an oboe, and it's a muted trumpet. And there's just all kinds of things like this throughout Ravel's works. And that was a really important thing to him. There was always a little bit of trickery. I believe there was a Debussy quote about he sort of called Ravel, like he didn't care for Ravel's posture as a composer, and he thought it was like, pulling like a rabbit out of a hat or flowers, and that, it was sort of cheap and you can only sort of fool the audience once. And this was just something Ravel liked to do. That passage with the clarinet, with the pizzicato underneath, he actually does that exact same thing with similar colors in the first movement, the first piece in Ma Mère Loire. It happens to be a muted horn and violi pizzicati with the mute on, but it's the same thing. So he's always looking for the main color and then something else to put behind it that you're just not exactly aware of what it is and why it sounds different. In this case, it's a sound and then something with an attack, and the attack and the transient is what changes the horn sound or the clarinet sound, like he's talking about in this passage. I mean, you could sort of say that the attack of a sound is sort of what gives it its character. So a recipe is maybe pick a color you like and mess with the transient, mess with the attack, whether it's pizzicati, a harp pluck, some tart little woodwind staccato underneath, maybe a legato thing, something. I'm just trying to give you suggestions. So, and then he sort of elaborates on this, actually, from the same passage in Ma Mère Loire. Ravel explained, flute and horn, fine, well chosen. But if I wish to fool the listener, which is to say, to lead him where I wish and how I wish, something else that will neither suspect nor notice must be introduced. Something that will confuse and transport him somewhere else. So I will change nothing in the flute, but rather intervene around the horn, already a bit in the background, surrounding its notes with pizzicati in the violas. They will be the same pitches, but by introducing the soft nuance, the horn will shelter the viola's pizzicati within its cloud of sound, and no one will hear them, something more than a horn without knowing quite what. Voila, that's what it means to orchestrate. So I actually forgot the passage. He used this passage as I was making this video. So I think you really have to sit with those two paragraphs for a while because I know I did, because that just floored me, because then it was like, all right, fine, forget about everything in the page. Like, now I know why he's making all of these choices that are, sorry, it's my keyboard. Now I know why he's making all of these choices. Those are his values. He wants to fool you, a lot of times. So I think that is just, it's an aesthetic of deception. There's just a little bit of deception and trickery, also coupled with his just tender, beautiful, like supple melodies. So there's these long melodies, like I'm thinking the Adagio and the Piano Concerto in G, and coupled with trickery, if anyone is interested in this book, I'm pretty sure you can still get it on Amazon. And for those that speak French, there's a wonderful book by Manuel Rosenthal just recounting all of his years of study with Ravel. So anyways, I guess one last thing to point out is just like how poetic he is about talking about these things, not just the concept itself, but just the poetry with the shelter, this and the halo. I mean, this was obviously translated from French, and so of course things get lost in translation, but I can read French okay, and from reading his letters to people, that's just how he spoke as a person. So I think that's also illuminating too, that he just spoke sort of the way that he orchestrated. Imagine that, like his music and his orchestration is an extension of who he is as a person. So anyways, we're at 9 minutes just from this part. But yeah, I really wanted to share this because I think that's the most important thing, more than, oh, Ravel liked to use a flute and do this and do that. I mean, very well, we can talk about that, but this kind of stuff is really... So that goes into his aesthetic and how I went about having a better sense of how he orchestrated, especially his piano music, was I never learned this from anyone. It was something I just did, I guess, out of boredom. I don't know. So what I chose was his comic opera Le Espagnol, I chose this for a very specific reason, being that it's opera and different characters, and that it was large ensemble instrumentation. Um, I just thought there would be a lot of cross cuts with the music, so there would be a lot of variety in the music to study, and a lot of variety meaning a lot of different gestures. So, what I did was really interesting. I would obviously start at the beginning, but I'll pick one passage. Excuse me. So, let's say this is rehearsal 4. The notes don't matter. But what I would do is I would just put it up on my piano. I'd play through the passage. I'd look at the dynamic. I'd look at the articulations, hairpins, and everything, phrasing. And I would start by going, okay, what do I think he's going to do? And I would also have the full score next to me with what he actually did. And this is such a cool thing because it's like taking an orchestration lesson with him and being like, Ravel, what would you do here in this passage? And then he's like, oh, here, let me come take a look. Let me show you. So I would torture myself by looking at one bar, one passage, and I would absolutely not peek at what the answer was. I would just stare for a while, and I would just think of all the different things that he might do. Was this going to be woodwinds here? Is this going to be strings? Is it strings? Is he going to divide them? And I would really, honestly, if I put a time on it, I might look at it for like 10 minutes, just a couple of bars. And it was almost like foreplay. I mean, I would torture myself knowing that the answer is right next to me and I could find it out. But I really wanted to exhaust every option and really, sort of dig deep. And eventually I'd look at the page and I'd be like, okay, I think it's going to be woodwinds. And then I'd look and it would be absolutely nothing like what I thought in the very beginning. And it was very overwhelming for me. It felt like, it just felt like this big mystery in front of me. And, anything that you take all at once, is a mystery, but when you break it down little bit by bit, things really slowly start to reveal themselves to you. And the more intimate you become with something and the time you spend, it rewards you. It's a gift and it comes back to you. You will be rewarded for your effort. I promise you. I promise. Because there was a time when I didn't know anything about anything. And I just did my 10,000 hours, so to speak. So this was my process, like I said, to look at this and then look at the orchestral page and see what he did. And then I would say to myself, well, why did he do that? Why woodwinds? Oh, the strings came before, new color. Okay, fine, got that. Why did he voice it this way? Why did he take this gesture in the piano that's in one bar, and why did he break it up? Why is the front half of the bar in the woodwinds, and why do the strings come in on the last beat? And then I'd see, oh, well, there's a big hairpin. Oh, they're answering. He's orchestrating the dynamic. Oh, okay, so that's a technique. And I would start making notes of all of these little things. Articulations, I'd start to see, what does he do when there's a staccato dot in the piano part? You're interpreting articulations. Oh, I noticed that it's usually a pizzicato, or maybe it's a heart pluck when I see a staccato dot. When I see a tenuto, what does that mean? When I see an accent, what does that mean? You're translating everything, and not everything is literal. You might see that eventually dynamics are not even literal. What's mezzo forte in the piano part might be piano in the orchestra, or pianissimo. So you can't even take the dynamics sometimes and the articulations literally. I can tell you that he will definitely revoice and respace things, but there's not a lot of literal from this to this. It's giving it a whole new lease on life. So eventually, after probably about 3 months of doing this and going bar by bar, page by page, different scores, but spending the most on this, eventually I started to make connections. And I started to see, oh, he's got something in the left hand. What's he going to do? I bet you it's either going to be, a pizzicato in the bass. Oh, it's pianissimo. I bet you it's going to be a left hand octave in the harp because that's going to be the quietest bass. Oh, I see a note that's got 8 VB and I know we don't say VB. I know that's not proper. But, it would read down an octave, down here. And I'd be like, what is he going to do in the orchestra? And I'd start seeing similarities and patterns, and I'd be like, oh, he wants to approximate the soundboard. Okay, he's going to do a tam-tam hit or something. And I don't want to say that Ravel is formulaic, but you start to understand all of his preferences. Because we all have colors that we like. We all have things that we go to, certain spacings, certain doublings. And so, yeah, I was able to start seeing and hearing, visualizing a lot of his preferences. I talked about the sonorous fluid, and I started to see, okay, I discovered he uses sonorous fluid. Okay, now I know it's a thing. Now I know to look for it. But now it's pianissimo. So who does he look to for, pianissimo sonorous fluid? Do you know what I mean? And then I go, oh, a horn with a fibromute. Oh, a clarinet. Oh, a harmonic, and then bit by bit, things slowly reveal themselves. So it's not this massive mystery. So that was my overall process. Another way you can do this, if you don't, if you can't afford the scores, or if you're just not a person that likes to put music on the piano, which is totally fine. You could IMSLP this stuff, and what you could do is you could categorize this and make screenshots of things. So let's say, for example, if we were to look at these two things, I might categorize this as a type of gesture, whatever, a sharp jab, however you want to call it. And then I might see, okay, so I would maybe call this a question. And what's the answer? Meaning, what did he do in the orchestration? So just by looking at this and seeing its mezzo forte, I can cheat because I already know what the answer is by looking at it. But even though I didn't write it in here, I'd go, it's probably going to be pizzicati. And because it's Ravel, and because the dynamics mezzo forte, there's absolutely no way that he's just going to divide it top down. No freaking way. He's going to make triple stops or double stops. And that's exactly what he does. So you can start to take these things apart, take it down to the studs bit by bit. Like, okay, here's a sharp eighth note. He's probably going to do pizzicato or a horn jab or, some woodwind chords. Okay, if he does pizzicato, now I at least know he's probably going to give them comfortable double stops or triple stops. Cool. I've got that in my toolbox. So that's basically the whole piano to orchestra thing. And that's a big part of a lot of the things that I studied. And the last type of study I did, I should also mention that I have been collecting his manuscripts for years and studying his handwriting and some of his shorthand, and also just checking for mistakes. I've been fortunate enough to do some consulting for some critical editions of Ravel's work. And anyway, so the last would just be normal score study, so to speak. And what I did with that, on top of what everyone else would do, which is who has the melody, how is he surrounding the melody, is I did something I think is really interesting, which is, and I'm sure you guys do this too, I would just go one instrument at a time. Like, for example, Daphne and Chloe. So I would go, but this is what I would do differently. Instead of taking, say, the clarinet and going, I'm just going to read the clarinet part, I would say I'm going to read through Daphnis and Chloe, and I'm only going to study the tuba and the bass clarinet and how he uses them in conjunction. What are they doing together? Are they playing together? Are they in octaves? And if you look, just to give you the answer, like at least in Daphnis, he has a tuba on the bottom and the bass clarinet's the fifth of the chord, not the trombone, because the bass clarinet is a better bass for a tuba. A tuba makes a really shitty bass for trombones. It just does. It's too full. But our ears accept it because that's just what it is. Tuba is the bass for the trombone sometimes. So you start to learn, oh, in a tutti, that he's probably going to do the tuba here, and the bass trombone will be the fifth. I'm sorry, the bass clarinet will be the fifth. And you get a better sense of, like, if you think about instruments having a job, so to speak, you'll start to see all of the different roles and jobs that he assigns. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, string harmonics. Okay, he's going to use them when he wants something ethereal, something anguished. Okay, fine. But if we did a pass and look through Daphnis or any of his works for string harmonics, you'll also notice like, oh, well, he uses that for sonorous fluid, like the sustain pedal. Okay, that's, two uses, so to speak. Oh, I noticed that when he needs 4-part harmony, and he only has, say, 3 clarinets, he might use a bass harmonic sandwiched inside the clarinets, and it becomes another clarinet. Like, oh, so he's looking at bass harmonics as like a woodwind, and it can complete a clarinet choir. Like, whoa. So you start to understand all of the different roles. He's kind of like MacGyver, if anyone, remembers that show from the 80s, which I'm dating myself. I'm 40 years old. So that was a really, really powerful thing for me to go through the scores and, like I said, just pick different roles and different things and only look at those things. And that's when you really, really start to see things. Like another thing I did was pizzicati. I went through Ravel scores and I highlighted in orange every time he used pizzicati, which sounds nuts. But I wanted to figure out why he was using it in this particular place. And what was it doing? Was it coloring something? Was it adding attack to something? So I noticed the entrance of something that I might not have normally noticed. So yeah, we are at 22 minutes and 54 seconds. And I filled in my eyebrows a little too dark today. So now I look all serious. Anyways, if you've stuck to the end, I love you. Thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, drop a comment below or send me a message. I'd be happy to share whatever it is that I know, and hopefully I have an answer. And if I don't, then I'm sorry. And maybe I'll figure out what the answer is. So anyways, wherever you are, I hope you are doing awesome. All right, thank you so much. See you later.